In a lot of Charlotte Mason circles, we hear this idea that we should leave the child alone and not mess with them. But I think what this comes from is a real desire to not mess with the child's ability to make connections. But that doesn't mean that the teacher has no role to play. We do have plenty of a role to play. So today we're going to break down what is the role of the teacher in a Charlotte Mason homeschool, and then what is the role of the student. My name is Joy Cherrick. I'm a homeschool mom of 7. I have been studying Charlotte Mason's methods for 15 years and have been home educating my children for 11 years. I have a podcast, However Imperfectly. Right now we are going through Charlotte Mason's 20 principles, and I will leave a link to that below. And also I'm the author of the Nature Study Hacking series, which is a series of books designed to help families get outside and use a nature journal. Now let's dig into this idea of the teacher's role and the child's role. So we are going to begin where we should always begin in a Charlotte Mason homeschool, and that is considering what is a person and how are they formed, to which end ought we be aiming. So that includes looking at the person of the teacher and looking at the person of the child. Both of them have equal value. The teacher, how do they take that role of authority and apply it? How do we do that in a homeschool setting? Well, we have lots of different tools available to us. We have our schedule that the mom is deciding on. We decide which books or which curriculum. If they're really small, we'll even tell them where to sit, and we might coach them on how to sit properly. You're not going to just flop over. You're not going to sit upside down while you're doing your writing assignment. That will not allow you to write neatly. And as mothers, we also are trying to cultivate habits in our child. So those, remember, are the 3 instruments that we have that are tools that allow us to teach and coach our children to do what they ought to do. And so habit formation is really key. We can think about, okay, the neatness, the level of attention, and the obedience. So we really have those 2 key aspects that the child ought to be doing that are connected to what the teacher is doing. So the child has the obedience and the habit of attention that they are working on first. Those are the kind of anchor ones. And then the teacher is organizing, cultivating, pulling in, and acting as that guide, philosopher, and friend. Now, you can't be a guide if you don't know where you're going. If you've ever been on a really long hike or just on a nature walk with a naturalist, you know how essential it is that that guide is there pointing out the flower that you would have never seen before, or, oh, we're going to take this path because this is where we will see the pink lady slippers. If you go that way, you're only going to see a bunch of pine forest. So it's very important that as mother teachers, we understand where we are taking our children. And I have a quote from Mason from volume 3, page 162. And she says, the teacher's business is to indicate, stimulate, direct, and constrain the acquirement of knowledge, but by no means to be the fountainhead and source of all knowledge in his or her own person. So what she's saying is the children should not be dependent on mom to get information. We should be showing them how to pull from the books that we have on the shelves, teaching them those little habits of learning. How do I really, it's so far as to say we're going to help them work through their reading and say, okay, here's what we're going to be looking for, or go ahead and write your narration, and here's what my expectation is. And I think that that's something that I've really fallen into, is not preparing my children enough for what is expected of them, and then I get back work that I'm not pleased with. And if we don't have any method for assessing our own school, we don't have time set aside to review that, then we're just going to be stuck in this cycle of, I assign them work, they don't do a proper job, and then I'm just confused as to how to move forward. We don't want that. We want to understand what our role is as the teacher and what their role is as the student. And in the same quote, Mason continues and says, children must be allowed to ruminate, must be left alone with their own thoughts. They will ask for help if they want it. So this is just this idea that we need to allow for those ideas to work on the student. And she's talking about an older student. She's not talking about your 6-year-old, right? We are guiding and directing and really hoping that our children will eventually be free to do the work and do it well. But how can they do that if we don't train them? I think there's this big idea that we want lifelong learners. You know, everybody says that. I want my kid to be a lifelong learner. But we don't realize that it actually takes training, modeling, and instruction to help our children get there. For me in particular, I am not a particularly studious person, academic person by nature. I have had to learn study techniques. I have had to learn what do I need to do to actually retain this information. If I'm confused, what are my tools available so that I can get it? Okay, now we're going to look at the role of the student. And I touched on it a little bit earlier, and it's extremely simple. Their role is to obey and to pay attention. And those are actually two of the foundational habits in a Charlotte Mason homeschool. We're learning and training them how to obey. We're teaching them what obedience looks like, that willfulness, that, you know, when they kind of say, oh, I don't want to do that right now, that is actually disobedience. So how are we coaching them through that so that both of us recognize it? And then what habits are we helping them cultivate so that we can move them toward really this cheerful obedience, that they are joyful because we're not, we're not trying to hurt them when we are saying, hey, we're going to sing a folk song now, or it's time for an art lesson, or we're going to, learn how to sew. Those are often, in our home at least, times where my kids kind of go, oh, I don't want to do that. But that really is so much friction points that are unnecessary. We do not want to be coming up against that type of resistance because in our homeschool, right, we are the captain of the ship. We are the ones directing. And I like to point out to my kids, how silly would it be if I'm the ship's captain saying, okay, I need this, these 3 things to happen. I need the swabby to go swab the deck. I need the navigator to go do his thing. I need these 3 things done. And then they said, no, I don't want to do that. Or I'll do that in a minute. It's ridiculous. So I am putting that same thought process toward my family and saying, hey, we need to work together so that we can get this ship out of the dock and moving forward. It is cheerful, it's joyful, it's not something that we're lording over them, which I think is another misconception in the Charlotte Mason world. I am going to leave you with a quote that kind of sums up this idea of what the teacher's role is, what the student's role is, and really what we're aiming toward. We are aiming toward independence. We are aiming toward self-governance and for character formation. Obedience and attention, those are character issues. That has nothing to do with knowledge. So this is from volume 2, which is Parents and Children, page 17 and 18. Further, though, the emancipation of the children is gradual. They acquiring day by day more the art and science of self-government. Yet there comes a day when the parents' right to rule is over. There is nothing left for the parents but to abdicate gracefully and leave their grown-up sons and daughters absolutely free agents, even though these still live at home, and though in the eyes of their parents they are not quite fit to be trusted with the ordering of themselves. If they fail in such self-ordering, whether as regards time, occupation, money, friends, most likely their parents are to blame for not having introduced them by degrees to the full liberty, which is their right as men and women. Anyway, it is too late now to keep them in training. Fit or unfit, they must hold the rudder for themselves. It is so humbling to read that and go, oh, I have a lot of work to do for myself as a person, and I know that I will not always do perfectly by my children. But we're so grateful we have the Holy Spirit that we can call on, that God himself educates our children and takes over in our weakness. So we do have the ability to pray and ask the Lord to intercede for us. But we have a duty, we have a responsibility, and that I think is what Mason lays out for us in her principles and in her volumes. She says, we have a duty to our children to teach them good habits and good living, to show them what is right and what is wrong, and teach them how to just look away from what is wrong and how to pursue what is right, that it might feed your mind and your soul, and that again, at the end, you will be a free man or woman. So that's all I have for today, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. If any of that resonated with you, how are you doing with your role as a parent and teacher, really that mother-teacher role? And then how are your students doing in their role as students, as learners? I'd love to hear that down below. All right, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.